The courtroom of the Galactic Tribunal was unlike anything found on Earth. Massive crystalline walls stretched up toward a ceiling that seemed to disappear into darkness. Floating platforms held hundreds of alien spectators from across the galaxy. Some had scales, others had fur, and many had forms that human eyes struggled to understand. The air itself hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting countless alien languages into sounds that made sense to each species present. In the center of it all, standing in a glowing circle on the floor, was Katie Miller. She was just 16 years old, wearing a torn colony jumpsuit that had once been blue but was now stained with dirt and dried blood. Her brown hair hung limply around her face, and her hands trembled at her sides. She'd never imagined her life would lead to this moment, standing trial before alien judges who barely understood what humans even were. The prosecution table was filled with aliens who seemed eager to see her punished. They whispered among themselves, their various appendages tapping on data screens that floated in the air before them. Behind Katie, her court-appointed defender sat quietly. He was a thin, gray-skinned alien who had barely spoken to her since being assigned to her case. She got the feeling he didn't really care whether she lived or died. Above them all sat Judge Threll. He was terrifying to look at. His body was like a massive insect, covered in dark green armor plating that clicked when he moved. His head featured compound eyes that reflected the courtroom lights in strange patterns. When he spoke, his mouth parts moved in ways that made Katie's stomach turn, and his words came through a translator device in a cold, mechanical voice. The lead prosecutor stood and began speaking. His species had 4 arms, and he used all of them to gesture dramatically as he laid out the charges against Katie. She was accused of stealing from Valtros Prime, a protected planet. She had broken into a sacred preservation zone. She had taken resources that were not hers to take. Each crime he listed made the alien audience murmur and click and buzz with what Katie assumed was disapproval. This human, the prosecutor said, pointing one of his 4 fingers at her, showed complete disregard for galactic law. She violated a protected world. She stole from a sacred site. Such crimes cannot go unpunished. We request the maximum penalty. Katie knew what that meant. They wanted to kill her for what she'd done. Her legs felt weak. The room started to spin a little. She hadn't eaten anything in more than 2 days. When they'd arrested her, they'd thrown her in a holding cell with nothing but a small amount of water. Nobody had asked if she needed food. Nobody had checked if humans required regular meals. To the aliens, going without food for a few days was nothing special. Many of them could survive for weeks or even months without eating. But humans weren't built that way. Katie's stomach ached. Her head pounded. The bright lights of the courtroom seemed too intense, making her eyes water. She could feel her heartbeat getting irregular. Her hands had started shaking hours ago and wouldn't stop. Every time she tried to focus on what the prosecutor was saying, his words seemed to drift away like smoke. Judge Threll's mechanical voice cut through her foggy thoughts. The defendant will stand at attention during these proceedings. This tribunal demands respect. Katie tried to straighten her back. She really did. But her body wasn't cooperating anymore. The simple act of standing upright felt like climbing a mountain. She took a deep breath and forced herself to look up at the massive judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice coming out much quieter than she intended. "I'm sorry, but I'm really hungry." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then the entire courtroom exploded with noise. Aliens chittered, clicked, buzzed, and made sounds Katie had no names for. She could tell they were shocked. Some seemed angry. Others seemed confused. A few were clearly offended that she would dare interrupt the proceedings with something so unimportant. Judge Threll's antennae snapped straight up. His compound eyes seemed to focus more intently on Katie. For a moment, she was sure he was about to order her execution right then and there. She'd been disrespectful. She'd interrupted. She'd made a fool of herself in front of the most important court in the galaxy. But then something strange happened. Judge Threll went very still. His head tilted slightly to one side. The bioscanners built into his judge's bench were feeding him information about Katie's physical condition. Data streamed across screens that only he could see. His advanced alien technology was reading her heart rate, her blood sugar, her brain activity, her cellular function. What those scanners told him didn't make sense. The readings showed a creature in severe distress. They showed someone whose body was beginning to shut down. They showed biological systems failing from lack of basic sustenance. They showed a species that was dying. And nobody in the courtroom had even noticed. Judge Threll sat frozen on his bench, staring at the data flowing across his private screens. For several long seconds he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just read. And with every line of information about human biology, his horror grew deeper. His neural processors had automatically pulled up the species file on humans when his scanners detected Katie's distress. These files existed for every known intelligent species in the galaxy. They contained basic biological information, cultural notes, dietary requirements, and environmental needs. Judge Threll had been serving on the Galactic Tribunal for 23 cycles, and he'd reviewed thousands of these files. But he'd never bothered to look at the human one. Humans were so new to galactic society. There'd been no reason to study them closely. Until now. What he read made his compound eyes widen in something close to panic. Humans required food intake every 4 to 6 hours. Not days. Not weeks. Hours. Their bodies ran on a constant energy cycle that demanded regular refueling. Without food, their blood sugar dropped. Their brains stopped functioning properly. Their organs began to fail. Extended starvation caused permanent damage and eventually death. The file contained warnings in bright red text. Human fragility required special consideration. Human biological needs were urgent and frequent. Human prisoners required feeding schedules that most species would find excessive. Judge Threll looked up from his screens at Katie standing in the defendant's circle. She was swaying more noticeably now. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone. Her eyes seemed unfocused. All the signs were there and he'd missed them. Everyone had missed them. Bailiff. His voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. The courtroom went quiet. When did the defendant last receive food? The bailiff, a stocky alien with blue scales, tapped on his data pad. He seemed unconcerned by the question. 54 standard hours ago, Your Honor. That's when she was first detained. Standard protocol for criminal defendants is to provide food once per week until trial concludes. Once per week. The words echoed in Judge Threll's mind. His species could easily go a month without eating. Most species in the tribunal could manage 2 to 3 weeks without any problems. The protocols were designed around these norms. Nobody had thought to check if humans were different. 54 hours, Judge Threll repeated slowly. His mandibles began clicking together rapidly, a sign of severe agitation in his species. This child has been without food for over 2 full days? The prosecutor stood up looking confused. Your Honor, I don't understand the relevance of. Be silent. Judge Threll's voice boomed through the translator at a volume that made several aliens jump in their seats. He'd never raised his voice like that in a courtroom before. His reputation was built on cold logic and calm deliberation. But there was nothing calm about him now. He looked back at Katie. She was barely standing. Her knees were locked, probably the only thing keeping her upright. Her hands clutched at the edge of the defendant's platform. 2 days without food. For a human, that wasn't protocol. That was torture. That was a death sentence being carried out slowly. Medical team to the courtroom immediately. Judge Threll commanded. Alarms began chirping as the emergency medical staff received the summons. This tribunal is in immediate recess. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Aliens shouted questions. The prosecution team was protesting loudly. The spectators buzzed and clicked and made various sounds of confusion. Court recesses were rare. Emergency medical calls during a trial were almost unheard of. Judge Threll ignoring the prosecution's objections was completely unprecedented. But Threll wasn't listening to any of them. He was already moving, descending from his high bench with shocking speed. His 6 legs carried him across the courtroom floor faster than most had ever seen him move. His armored body clicked and clattered as he went straight to Katie. She looked up at him with unfocused eyes. This massive alien judge, this creature who'd been about to sentence her to death, was suddenly right in front of her. Up close he was even more terrifying. Each of his compound eyes was the size of her fist. His mandibles could probably bite through steel. Can you walk, child? He asked, his translated voice somehow gentler than before. Katie nodded weakly, though she wasn't sure it was true. Judge Threll made a decision. He carefully extended one of his limbs, offering support. Katie hesitated for only a moment before accepting it. The armored limb was surprisingly warm. Come with me, Threll said. You need food. Now. The courtroom watched in absolute shock as Judge Threll personally escorted the defendant out of the trial chamber. Judges didn't do this. Judges never left the bench during proceedings. Judges certainly didn't show personal concern for the accused. But Judge Threll was doing all of those things and he didn't care what anyone thought. As they walked through the corridors toward his private chambers, Katie stumbled. Judge Threll caught her easily, preventing her fall. Medical staff came running from the opposite direction. their equipment floating beside them. "Prepare human-compatible nutrients," Thrall ordered them. "Immediately. This is a Code 7 medical emergency." Code 7 meant life-threatening situation. The medical staff's eyes widened, and they rushed ahead to prepare. Judge Thrall looked down at Katie, who was leaning heavily against his armored side now. They'd been torturing her. Not intentionally, but the result was the same. They'd taken a child who'd been trying to survive and slowly killed her while preparing to execute her for the crime of not wanting to die. Judge Thrall's mandibles clicked with determination. Something was very wrong with how this case had been handled, and he was going to find out exactly what had happened. Judge Thrall's private chambers were nothing like Katie had imagined. The walls were lined with something that looked like polished stone but shimmered with colors she'd never seen before. Shelves held artifacts from 100 different worlds. But Katie barely noticed any of it. Her entire focus was on staying conscious and not collapsing onto the floor. Within minutes, Thrall's staff began arriving with food. They came through different doors, carrying trays and containers of all shapes and sizes. The judge had sent out an emergency call to every department in the building that might have something a human could eat. A synthesizer unit was rolled in first, already working to create basic protein blocks. These were standard emergency rations used across the galaxy, designed to provide nutrition to most carbon-based life forms. Then came preserved fruits from various worlds, each one tested against the human biological database to ensure they weren't toxic. Someone brought purified water in a container that kept it at the perfect temperature for human consumption. But what surprised Katie most was when one of the staff members rushed in carrying an actual loaf of bread. Real bread. The kind her mother used to make back on Earth. The staff member explained breathlessly that there was a human trading vessel docked 2 systems away, and they'd made an emergency faster-than-light jump to deliver it. All of this. For her. A prisoner. Someone they'd been planning to execute. Katie felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. She'd spent the last 2 days thinking she was going to die. She'd made peace with it. She'd accepted that her life would end in this alien place, far from home, with no one to remember her. And now this terrifying judge was bringing her food. Was saving her life. "Sit," Judge Thrall said, gesturing to a chair that automatically adjusted itself to human proportions. "Eat slowly. Your digestive system has been compromised. If you eat too quickly, you'll make yourself sick." Katie sat down with shaking legs. She reached for the bread first, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it. The smell hit her and fresh tears came. It smelled like home. It smelled like safety. She took a small bite and the taste exploded in her mouth. She'd never realized how much she'd taken food for granted until it was gone. Judge Thrall watched her for a moment, making sure she was actually eating and not going to pass out. Then he turned to his main display screen and pulled up Katie's case file. He'd read the charges before the trial, of course. He always reviewed charges. But he'd never bothered to read the detailed background. The charges were clear. Unauthorized entry onto a protected planet, theft of protected resources, violation of preservation protocols. Those were the facts that mattered for a trial. Except they weren't the full story. Not even close. Judge Thrall began reading from the beginning, and with each paragraph, his mandibles clicked together more rapidly. The colony ship Horizon had been carrying 300 human settlers to a new world. These were families. Children. People looking for a fresh start on a planet that had been designated for human colonization. They'd had permits. They'd followed all the proper procedures. They were legal colonists doing everything right. But their navigation system had failed. Some kind of technical malfunction that the ship's AI couldn't fix. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the wrong system, and before they could correct course, they'd been caught in Valtros Prime's gravity well. The ship had crashed hard. 300 people had been on that ship. Only 37 survived the initial impact. The file contained images from the crash site that made even Judge Thrall's alien sensibilities recoil. The ship had been torn apart. Bodies were everywhere. The survivors had been injured, traumatized, and stranded on a planet they'd never meant to visit. But it got worse. Much worse. Valtros Prime was a protected world, which meant it had automated defense systems. These systems were designed to keep poachers and illegal harvesters away from protected resources. They were programmed to identify threats and eliminate them. And when the survivors of the Horizon started moving around, looking for shelter and supplies, the defense systems identified them as threats. 18 more people died in the first day. Killed by defense drones that shot first and never bothered to ask questions. Parents died protecting their children. Young adults died trying to find water. The automated systems didn't care that these were shipwreck survivors. They only cared that unauthorized life forms were moving around on a protected planet. That left 19 adults and 3 children. 22 humans total, stranded on a hostile world with killer drones hunting them. Their emergency supplies had been destroyed in the crash. They had no food. The children were crying from hunger, and there was nothing the adults could do about it. That's when they'd found the grove. The prosecution had called it a sacred preservation site. Judge Threll dug deeper into the planetary records, accessing files that apparently the prosecution hadn't bothered to check. The grove was part of an agricultural experiment started 73 years ago. Scientists had been testing which Earth fruits could grow on Valtros Prime's soil. The experiment had been abandoned decades ago when the scientists moved on to other projects. Nobody was monitoring it. Nobody was maintaining it. The fruits just grew wild, ripened, and fell to rot on the ground. There was nothing sacred about it. There was no religious significance. It was just an old grove that had been forgotten about. Katie and the other survivors had found it while hiding from the defense drones. They'd seen fruit hanging from trees. Fruit that looked similar to what they had on Earth. The children were starving. One of them, a little boy named Billy Reed, had become so weak he couldn't walk anymore. Katie had stolen 20 fruits. 20 pieces of fruit that would have rotted within days anyway. She'd fed the children. She'd probably saved their lives. And for this, the Galactic Tribunal wanted to execute her. Judge Threll felt something he rarely experienced. Rage. Pure, burning rage at the injustice of it all. Katie finished the last of the bread and took a long drink of water. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her hands had stopped shaking quite so badly. She still felt weak and exhausted, but at least the room had stopped spinning. She could think clearly again for the first time in days. Judge Threll moved to sit across from her. The furniture in his chambers automatically adjusted to accommodate his large insectoid body. He folded his multiple limbs carefully and looked at Katie with those massive compound eyes that had terrified her in the courtroom. But somehow here in the quiet of his chambers, he seemed less frightening. "I need you to tell me everything," Threll said. His translator made his voice sound gentler now, less mechanical. "Start from the moment your ship crashed. Tell me the whole story. Don't leave anything out." Katie nodded slowly. She'd been preparing to die without ever getting to tell her side of things. The trial had been moving so fast, and her court-appointed defender had told her not to speak unless directly questioned. Now this judge was asking her to explain, actually wanting to hear what had happened. So she told him everything. She described how the Horizon had been traveling through space, all 300 passengers excited about their new home. People were planning their lives, talking about what they'd build, what they'd grow, how they'd create a new community together. Katie's own parents had been discussing where to build their house. Her little brother had been practicing the speech he wanted to give at the colony's first school. Then the navigation system failed. Alarms started blaring throughout the ship. The AI kept trying to fix the problem, but nothing worked. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the wrong place. Within minutes, they were being pulled toward a planet by gravity they couldn't escape. The captain tried everything, but the engines were failing too. Katie's voice broke as she described the crash. The horrible sounds of metal tearing apart. The screaming. The way the ship had broken into pieces as it hit the ground. She'd been knocked unconscious by the impact. When she woke up, she was trapped under debris with bodies all around her. Her parents were gone. Her little brother was gone. Most of the people she'd known were dead. The 37 survivors had gathered together, all of them injured and traumatized. They'd barely had time to treat their wounds before the defense drones found them. Katie described watching the flying machines gun down Mr. Peterson, who'd just been looking for medical supplies. Then Mrs. Chong, who'd been trying to find water for the injured. Then others, one by one, picked off by machines that didn't care that they were just trying to survive. The group ran. They hid. They moved at night and stayed still during the day. But they couldn't find any food. The planet's ecosystem was completely alien. Nothing looked safe to eat. The emergency rations from the ship were buried under tons of wreckage they couldn't move. The children suffered most. Billy Reed was only 6 years old. He'd watched his parents die in the crash. Now he was starving, getting weaker every day. Melissa Carter was 7, and she'd stopped talking entirely from the trauma and hunger. Nathan Brooks was 9, and he kept apologizing for being hungry as if it was his fault. The adults decided someone had to go look for food, Katie said, staring at her hands. They drew lots to see who would risk it. Mr. Harrison pulled the short stick. But I volunteered to go instead. Judge Threll's antennae moved forward, a gesture of interest in his species. Why would you do that? You were a child yourself. Because the kids had already watched so many adults die, Katie said simply. Billy had nightmares every night about his parents. Melissa wouldn't eat what little water we found. Nathan kept saying it was his fault people were dying because he was hungry. They couldn't handle watching another adult go out and not come back. So Katie had gone. She'd taken some wire from the crashed ship and moved carefully through the forest, avoiding the patrol patterns of the defense drones. She'd always been good with technology, had helped her dad repair things back on Earth. When she found the security fence around the grove, she'd studied it for hours, figuring out how the electromagnetic field worked. Judge Threll interrupted. You bypassed Valtro's security systems with salvaged wire and no tools? Katie nodded. It took me most of a day. But I got through. Judge Threll made a clicking sound that might have been amazement. Those security systems were designed by advanced civilizations. They'd never been breached before. And a 16-year-old human had figured them out with nothing but wire and determination. Inside the grove, Katie had found fruit trees. The fruit looked similar to apples from Earth, though the color was slightly different. She'd taken 20 of them, as many as she could carry. Then she'd made her way back to the survivors' hiding spot. The kids ate, Katie said, and for the first time she smiled a little. Billy actually laughed. I hadn't heard him laugh since before the crash. Melissa ate 2 whole fruits and asked for more. Nathan stopped apologizing. But Katie had known the security breach would be detected. She'd known they'd come looking. So she told the others to run deeper into the forest while she stayed behind. When the security forces arrived, they found her alone with empty fruit stems. She'd been arrested immediately. I let them catch me, Katie said. So the others would have time to get away with the kids. I don't even know if they made it. Nobody will tell me if they're alive or dead. Judge Threll sat very still for a long moment. 20 fruits from an abandoned grove. To feed 3 traumatized, starving children. And this girl had sacrificed herself so the others could escape. The dangerous criminal, the prosecution described, didn't exist. Before him sat a child who'd shown more courage and compassion than most adults ever would. Come, Judge Threll said, standing. His voice carried a weight of determination. We're returning to the courtroom. And things are about to change. When Judge Threll and Katie returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed completely. Word had spread through the building about what had happened. Spectators whispered to each other. The prosecution team looked nervous. Even the court officials seemed uncertain about what was coming next. Judge Threll climbed back to his elevated bench with deliberate slowness. Each of his 6 legs clicked against the floor in a rhythm that demanded attention. When he reached his seat, he stood there for a long moment, looking out over the assembled aliens. The courtroom gradually fell silent. Every eye, compound or otherwise, focused on him. Katie stood in the defendant's circle again, but she looked different now. Her face had color in it. Her eyes were clear and focused. She stood straight without swaying. The food had given her back her strength, at least enough to face whatever came next. She'd told her story. She'd done everything she could. Now her fate rested in the hands of this alien judge who'd shown her unexpected kindness. I have reviewed this case in its entirety, Judge Threll began. His translated voice carried through the massive chamber with perfect clarity. I have read every file. I have examined every piece of evidence. I have spoken at length with the defendant. And what I have found is not justice. What I have found is a complete and absolute failure of everything this tribunal is supposed to represent. The prosecution team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Several spectators leaned forward, surprised by the judge's words. Judges didn't typically speak like this. They maintained neutrality. They stayed calm and detached. But there was nothing detached about Judge Threll's tone now. He turned to face the prosecution directly. You have charged this child with theft from a protected world. Let me address each of these charges with the facts you conveniently chose to ignore. Judge Threll activated a holographic display that showed the planet Valtros Prime. First, this protected world you speak of. Protected from what? There are no indigenous sentient species on this planet. There are no endangered ecosystems requiring preservation. The protection status was granted purely as a bureaucratic formality 73 years ago and never reviewed. The lead prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, if I may object to this characterization. You may not. Judge Threll's voice cracked like thunder. His mandibles clacked together sharply, and the prosecutor sat down immediately. You have had your time to speak. Now you will listen. The holographic display changed to show the fruit grove. Second, you called the location a sacred site. I have accessed the complete planetary records. This grove was part of an agricultural experiment abandoned 7 decades ago. There is no religious significance. There is no cultural importance. There is no active monitoring or maintenance. It is simply an old project that everyone forgot about. Fruit grows there, ripens and falls to the ground where it rots. That is all. Judge Threll zoomed in on images of the fruit. Third, the stolen resources you describe. 20 fruits. Not 20 shipments. Not 20 tons. 20 individual fruits that would have decomposed naturally within days. The estimated value of these fruits, according to your own economic database, is less than 1/10 of a standard credit. You are seeking the death penalty over resources worth less than the energy used to power this courtroom for 5 minutes. Murmurs spread through the spectators. Some aliens looked uncomfortable. Others seemed surprised, as if they were hearing these details for the first time. The prosecution team had made it sound so much worse in their initial presentation. But Judge Threll wasn't finished. The holographic display changed again, showing the crash site of the horizon. The images were brutal. Debris scattered across kilometers. Bodies visible in the wreckage. The destruction was total. Now let me tell you what actually happened here, Threll continued. 300 human colonists were traveling legally to their designated settlement world. They had committed no crimes. They had violated no laws. Their ship malfunctioned through no fault of their own, and they crashed on Valtros Prime. 263 people died in that crash. They were innocent colonists who became victims of mechanical failure. The courtroom had gone completely silent now. Even the translation devices seemed quieter, as if they too were paying attention. The 37 survivors gathered together, injured and traumatized. And then our automated defense systems killed 18 more of them. 18 people who desperately needed rescue were instead executed by machines that never bothered to determine if they were actually threats. Parents protecting children. Young adults searching for water. All killed because our systems shoot first and ask no questions. Judge Threll's compound eyes seemed to glow brighter. That left 19 adults and 3 children. Stranded. Starving. Watching their people die around them. And this child, he gestured to Katie, this brave young woman risked her life to feed 3 traumatized children. She bypassed security systems that trained engineers consider unbreakable. She took 20 fruits to save 3 lives. And then she sacrificed herself so the others could escape. He stood to his full height, towering over the courtroom. And how did we respond? We arrested her. We threw her in a cell. We starved her for over 2 days without realizing humans need to eat regularly. We prepared to execute her for the crime of not wanting children to die. We almost killed her through our own ignorance before we could kill her officially. Judge Threll's voice dropped lower, but somehow it carried even more weight. The Galactic Tribunal was founded on 3 principles. Justice for all sentient beings. Mercy when circumstances demand it. And the protection of innocent life. In this case, we have failed all 3 principles completely. He looked directly at Katie. Katie Miller, all charges against you are dismissed. You are not only innocent, you are a hero. You saved lives. You showed courage that most trained soldiers would envy. You sacrificed yourself for children who weren't even related to you. If this tribunal had any sense, we would be giving you a medal, not a trial. The courtroom exploded with noise. Aliens were shouting, clicking, buzzing, making every kind of sound imaginable. Some seemed angry. Others seemed supportive. The prosecution team was on their feet, objecting loudly. But Judge Threll raised one limb and somehow the gesture cut through all the chaos. I am not finished, he said. His voice carried absolute authority. By my power as senior judge of this tribunal, I hereby order the following actions.